Last for today. There will be more Coffee Talk goodness tomorrow. This is the highly anticipated Ric Lewis Goes Crazy session. Yeah. It's a highlight of any Discover. And of course, the audience have found the beer, and unfortunately, Ric has not.
Yeah, that which is unfair advantage for sure.
And I think, Ric, you'll just take it away and run us through, because you've got Waylon as well.
Okay, I brought a guest with me. This is Waylon Jiang. He's the GM of my OneSphere business. And since we're, we haven't met with this august group on OneSphere before. We launched it at Discover Madrid. And so I thought you might like to hear a little bit more about OneSphere at some point. And so I thought, and you'd like to meet Waylon since you've met other folks on my team over time. So usually what I do is I start out and ramble for a little while, just a little bit about what's going on here at Discover. And we'll keep this super informal, as we should for a blogger session. So a couple of things going on. We're pretty excited about the fact that our software-defined infrastructure portfolio has really kind of come into its own. OneView has hit 1 million licenses now. We announced that a couple of weeks ago. SimpliVity is growing at 2.5x the market rate, and we have almost 3,000 customers on SimpliVity. And Synergy is got 1,600 customers in the year and a half since we started shipping it, and is the highest growth value infrastructure play we've ever seen, including all of our stuff, Blade System, Converge System, including the competitor stuff, VCE and FlexPod and Nutanix and all those things. So Synergy is just on an explosive growth rate. Due to its lack of competition. It's the only composable infrastructure on the market so far. So those are the on-prem things. We had a pretty big announcement here about a month ago around Plexxi. We acquired Plexxi. We closed on that June 1. Super excited about Plexxi because it brings hyperconverged networking to the hyperconverged space, so we can put it with our SimpliVity offering, put it all under the same management domain in due time, which we'll talk about. And yeah, there's a lot going on there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're also going to use it to make a composable rack product to kind of match what we have in our composable blade kind of product, which is our Synergy chassis. So that's been a big area of news. And then the other thing is HPE OneSphere. Since last time I spoke with you here in Vegas, we've launched HPE OneSphere, and we're pretty happy with it. We're still in kind of early customer and POC mode. We're running it like a mini startup within the company, getting a lot of feedback. It's a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development product. So we're continuously rolling out features. We now support AWS and Azure. In addition to capabilities to not only orchestrate your private cloud, but to deploy your private cloud. OneSphere, which lives in the public cloud, a SaaS application, speaks to OneView and is able to do kind of special control stuff down to OneView. So that's the macro overview of the stuff that we're talking about here at Vegas. We got a ton of momentum on these platforms. I think it's pretty cool because there were years gone by when I was speaking to you and we were talking about our intentions and our vision and where we were going. Now we're kind of talking about all the stuff we're shipping and a ton of customers, and we've got customers everywhere on stage talking about all these things. So it's been a fantastic journey here so far in software defined and cloud. A few more thoughts on the newer things there. So Plexxi itself, we liked it beyond just being able to bundle with our SimpliVity and our being able to create a composable rack. In a Synergy system, we have the fabric. We did our own custom fabric in Synergy. It's under OneView control. That's nice. You can set it up and configure it a certain way. And if you want to change the configuration, it's super easy to change because it's under OneView. But the fabric itself doesn't. It doesn't understand, the one that's in Synergy chassis today doesn't understand endpoints, can't really guarantee bandwidth between anything. It's very configurable. The Plexxi software that we got, this software-defined networking software, is endpoint-aware, intent-based networking. So we actually can, for given applications, we can give not only priority but also specify what the needs are of the app talking to whatever it's talking to, and then the Plexxi software dynamically changes over time, dynamically as you add more load, adjusts to the load and make sure that you're meeting the SLA for those given applications, which is super powerful and very dynamically composable, if you will. So, and ultimately we'll integrate that in our Synergy chassis to replace the one that we have now. But honestly, that's lower on our priority list than shipping it first with SimpliVity and then shipping it under OneView as a composable rack. So that's kind of where we're going.
Do you
with
also
Plexxi.
see a place for their hardware, their silicon photonic stuff related to your silicon photonic stuff?
We haven't spoken a lot about that. We're not, the way I would say it is, we're not interested in their hardware. We're interested in their software and its applicability to our hardware, because we've been working on silicon photonic work as part of the machine development, and so we do see an extension there, an opportunity, but we're not quite ready to
and to
talk
be
in
fair,
detail.
they backed away from the silicon photonics and moved to much more generic
The reason they
switching
backed
hardware.
away from that quite some time ago is silicon photonics had not come down the cost curve. So let's say if we were to develop some IP that would deliver silicon photonics in a cost-effective way, it would be very powerful to put that software on there. But that's for another day and another conversation. So, yep. So that's kind of the new thing on Plexxi. Maybe Waylon, since OneSphere is super new, you can just kind of give a high-level description. What's it for? What's the, I can do it, but my voice is a little shot. So I'll let you roll.
No worries. So the way I like to talk about OneSphere is kind of in two dimensions. First, what's the strategy? What is OneSphere about, and how does it fit into the bigger picture? So the thing to think about OneSphere, don't think about OneSphere by itself. OneSphere is part of our software-defined technology stack, and OneSphere is going to work very well with all of the other technologies that we have, and that's composability, that's software-defined storage with SimpliVity, that's software-defined networking with Plexxi, and bringing that all under a SaaS-delivered management plane is part of our technology stack and part of our investment in platforms. And one picture that I'm not sure if you showed, Rick, or maybe Antonio showed, but the vision around how we develop platforms is OneView in the data center that gives us an API for the rack, allows us to drive hardware infrastructure through APIs, and then OneSphere, it's delivered as a SaaS service that helps manage those on-premise resources as well as the public cloud resources. So from a platform perspective.
I keep forgetting the mic. So how does OneSphere get licensed?
So OneSphere is licensed as a subscription. Today it's a subscription service, so you can have a 1, 3, or 5-year subscription. It's tied to what we call a hybrid license unit, which is nominally either a dual socket server, or you can take that license and equivalently use 20 vCPUs in the cloud.
Okay, so it's not tied to the number of procs you have overall in your environment, or the number of
Well, that's
cores.
a proxy for that, right? So if you have one hybrid license unit for a given server and you have 100 servers, then you're going to need 100 licenses.
Okay.
But those licenses are flexible in the sense that if those workloads wanted to move to the public cloud,
Sure.
there's an equivalent. See now.
As long as every proc is.
Yep. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yep. So from a platform perspective, that's the way to think about OneSphere. Think about it as part of the overall strategy of how we're delivering and building software-defined. The inspiration behind OneSphere, and that's the other dimension to think about it, is what's the problem? What's the use case? What's the business problem we're trying to solve? The business problem is really that discontinuity between the traditional IT world and ITIL processes and DevOps. So if you think of that tension, you think about a lot of our customers who are, their IT departments are under stress because there's shadow IT going on in the line of business. There's organizations that are going directly to work with cloud platforms. And every API that's delivered that developers consume and find goodness in those APIs because they get speed and agility is yet another threat surface that you need to secure. It's another place where you need to apply governance and policy. Every interaction with the cloud, there's a meter running in the background that's driving cost. So getting cost transparency, being able to provide IT governance in such a way that allows you to have that kind of guardrail for the developers, but not impede their ability to have speed and agility, that's really the inspiration behind OneSphere. So the customers that really are engaging with the product are seeing that as kind of the foundation and the foundational problem that we're trying to solve.
So those are probably the newest things.
POCs? Yeah, so I think another thing that is good to understand is that we could have taken two different strategies with OneSphere. One strategy would be, ship a license with every piece of tin that comes out of the factory and just artificially drive up our license attach rate to hardware. But the other approach, which is the approach we took, is really a deliberate approach around trying to be very customer focused and customer driven, and to have deep engagements with our customers to make sure that we can evolve the product along with the customer use cases we see. So initially, we're focused on targeted geographies. It's North America, UK and I, and we're going to expand judiciously those geographies. And we're really focused on the customers that have this cloud stress and they're looking for an answer, and OneSphere is about that. So a lot of what we're doing right now is POCs. There's production customers as well. I think Stanley Bett was part of your keynote, which is one of our early adopter customers, and they love the product. They have it deployed in their data centers. They're a great use case where they do essentially online gambling, but they really can't do transactions, gambling transactions in the cloud. They actually have to do them in a tax-friendly haven in a data center somewhere that gives them some advantages. But they have a future desire to actually do their free online gambling in the public cloud, and kind of have all the benefits of running their free transactionless gambling in Amazon or Azure. So they're a really good use case of private cloud today with an eye to public cloud workloads. And that's one customer that has really found OneSphere as a way to kind of solve a lot of their problems.
So I think rather than walk through too many more details on the products, you guys always do a great job of asking questions. So fire away, and we'll see if we can answer them.
So help us understand the relationship of the service OneSphere provides versus data center orchestration, like Kubernetes. Like where's that relationship?
Yep. Between
the two types of services?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, and I think what the industry suffers from a little bit is term overload, because the term orchestration can mean a lot of different things. I mean, Kubernetes is one thing you mentioned. There's kind of traditional ITOM orchestration, so things like vRealize automation or CSAOO from Micro Focus. So there's a lot of different orchestrations. So let's break that down. So the traditional ITOM orchestration is the way that IT organizations, when the line of business weren't developing applications, it was really just the IT organization deploying and trying to create patterns for applications. They needed a tool to be able to help them replicate their multi-tier application deployments. And things like CSAOO and vRealize were great tools for that. But where the business has gone is the line of business now is developing those applications, and they're having quite a strong opinion about what tools they want to use. And they're using cloud native tools. So they might have a high preference for CloudFormation because they're an AWS shop, or they might have a affinity towards ARM templates because they're an Azure shop, or they might be using Terraform from HashiCorp because they see that as potentially one orchestration tool that they can use across cloud platforms. Where we don't want to get into with OneSphere is to get into that opinionated debate about those kind of tools. So that level of orchestration, OneSphere is not trying to play. We're trying to be very focused. But in the area of Kubernetes, that's a really good example of, it's an orchestration tool, but we don't want to dictate how the developers use Kubernetes. We want to be able to help the developers deploy Kubernetes, because that's a mundane task. That's something that requires a lot of inside baseball knowledge of how to, the vagaries of master nodes and worker nodes, and how to set up the bits correctly on all the different nodes in a cluster, and how to expand it and make it elastic. So the setting up and maintenance of Kubernetes clusters is something that we do want to help automate and we want to provide value for. But when the developers consume those Kubernetes clusters, we let them use kubectl and the native tools and the native APIs, and we try and get out of the way of the developers as much as possible and allow them to use the tools that they know and love.
So speaking of getting out of the way of developers, so let's go different layer, which is, the PaaS layer, so Cloud Foundry. Explain how would OneSphere interface with something like Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, similar answer to Kubernetes, which is we can help build a Cloud Foundry cluster. We can help deploy that Cloud Foundry cluster. Cloud Foundry is software at the end of the day that runs on some hardware, and that hardware needs to have the latest BIOS and firmware and software upgrades, and we need to be able to orchestrate that. We need to make sure workloads get evacuated. We need to make sure that a resiliency is maintained. But we don't want to get in the business of competing. The same story, right? We don't want to get in the business of competing with the vendors that are providing PaaS solutions, because our customers is the IT department, who have themselves customers that are developers that have opinions about that. So they might be a Cloud Foundry shop. They might also be an OpenShift shop. Or they might, you're starting to see some trends around Kubernetes, where Kubernetes itself, with things like Istio and Service Mesh and a lot of tools that are being built on top of that, the line between an orchestration tool and a PaaS layer is starting to blur. So that world is moving very fast.
Self-plug, I wrote a whole ebook on that, you guys. But go ahead.
Okay, yeah. That world is moving fast, and we want to make sure that we're, choice is what we're about, right? We're about trying to ensure that the developers have choice and that we don't get in their
choice, but automation of the routine, mundane underlying infrastructure, the stuff that kind of just needs to be set up and work and be consistent, so that they're not doing maintenance of the base level infrastructure.
I mean, what was the popularity in cloud? Cloud was because there were APIs to do things that you couldn't do before. You had to submit a ticket and somebody did something for you, but now you have an API for that, right? Infrastructure, that's where we add value as HPs, because we're providing APIs for the infrastructure. And that allows you to automate those mundane tasks that Rick was talking about, to make sure that there's business value that the IT department can bring to their customers.
So talk to a second problem when infrastructure is providing cloud services to developers. A big problem like service discovery. What can I do on-prem? What can I do in public cloud? What is the best service to select to do my job?
Yep.
And they look towards infrastructure for that solution. Does OneSphere help with that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the sense of being an expert system to help customers make choices, the area of cost is where OneSphere comes in. And one of the first questions you're going to have as a business is, how much is my application going to cost me to run in a particular cloud platform? And what OneSphere, what's on our roadmap, is a whole area of cost analytics that help give you tools to be able to do those what-if analysis. So to be able to say, here's my application, download the rate cards from Azure, GCP, Cloud 28 partners, FlexCap calculators for my Synergy systems, and take my application and model it in all of those platforms to give me some advice about where best to run that application. Eventually, the world will move towards policy, where policy will drive not only the cost optimization, but the workload optimization of where dynamically you want to move those workloads. What we see right now is that's a maturity model that most customers aren't at yet. Typically, they're going to make a decision about where that application wants to land, and it'll pretty much stay there for a number of reasons. There might be data gravity reasons. There's data that accumulates and wants to be where that application runs. There might be certain aspects of that cloud platform that are native to it, like services like DNS or load balancers, or various services that are native to that platform that make it sticky. But the future and the vision would be that there's policy that drives not only kind of the choice of where an application goes, but where it needs to live at any given time.
I think part of that question too might be around projects, right, as part of OneSphere, and kind of giving that choice of the aligned view of what you're, quote, allowing and enabling the developers with. So maybe talk about projects, that arena of...
Yeah. Projects and service catalogs are central to OneSphere. It's kind of the central concept, along with role-based access, what we call personas. If you saw my theater pitch, you saw we did a little skit on having different personas represented in my presentation. But projects is basically a set of resources that are given governed access to a set of users, and those set of users as defined by their corporate identity. So, and that project workspace is inherently hybrid. So if you saw the demo I did in the theater presentation, that project workspace had Helm charts that you could deploy in AWS. It had VMware templates you can deploy in your ESX cluster. And that project has policy that governs how that workspace is accessed. Service catalogs are a corollary to the projects. They're attached to the projects. And that allows the IT organization to say, what are the artifacts? What are the things that those project teams can use? So don't think about a service catalog as a destination for content. It's not trying to replace Artifactory or Bitnami. It's trying to curate that content. It's trying to collect that content. So when you build up your service catalog, you point to your GitHub repo, or you point to your Docker Hub, and we'll build that content, the metadata for that content, and allow you to provide that content to those project teams.
So Rick, help us bring this back up a level. As we talk Plexxi, telemetry data that comes out of Plexxi that can feed OneSphere to help make intelligent decisions. You guys are probably going to be way ahead of like Kubernetes projects when it comes to stuff like that, because there is no construct of, latency is coming off of coming out of this cloud, so this is not the best place to place that workload. But within the data center, you guys can make those decisions. As a developer, I'll start to rely on that capability. How do you kind of keep that capability? Because I will start to expect that capability in a public cloud. So how do you handle that from a product perspective?
So you're right on, and we're not quite to where we're announcing features around that, but two-way information flow about what the application performance is looking like versus the infrastructure and how that's working, and utilizing that up at the higher level and integrating that in from a back to the what if analysis. Hey, if you run it right now and your current on-prem infrastructure is very taxed, maybe it's not the right time to do that. Or if it's not taxed, for example, there are some Jelly Bean apps. Waylon kind of mentioned, well, some apps, they're going to be sticky. Some aren't. They're Jelly Bean, I say, they're ephemeral in nature. They spin up, they spin down. And you want to just kind of deploy them in the cheapest, freest way possible. Where there's spot capacity on the public cloud, you want to take advantage of that. But you have a boatload of spot capacity in your data center when the infrastructure is not taxed, because most people over-provision their data center for peak workloads. Well, there are times when it's like you can run that ephemeral task on-prem basically free, because there's nothing else, it's not being taxed. So we definitely not only plan to, but we have information communication back and forth between the on-prem, OneView, and OneSphere, and that channel will enhance over time. Early on, it's more about configuration and enumeration and kind of telling me and saying, hey, deploy my ESX cluster to look like this. So it's just kind of, it's more of a blunt instrument in the first round, but we definitely have a vision in the plumbing to be able to say, at some point, it's fine-tuned feedback back and forth where we can optimize the on-prem and make choices about where to deploy things based on there's idle infrastructure sitting there. Why wouldn't you just run it for free and keep that utilization up? So, yeah. All right, we should probably spread the love here a little bit. Anybody else have some questions?
We had the Aruba guys in here earlier, and I asked them a question about integration with things that are not Aruba. And I particularly am interested in your view on integration between the Aruba product set and OneView, which and potentially OneSphere. How's that going to play out over time?
Yeah, so maybe I'll speak a little bit about that. The more obvious part of that question is really the OneSphere kind of thing, because if you look at what OneSphere is, a multi-cloud kind of tool, and if you blur your vision just a little bit, a bunch of edge devices look like a little cloud. And so we built OneSphere from the beginning to be multi-cloud. So there are some differences, and it kind of depends what kind of horsepower, if you will, you have at the edge. If you're talking about edge compute that has, compute with networking and all that, that's a little higher weight than a bunch of, counters sitting in some, whatever it is, something without a whole lot of intelligence. But the same challenges kind of exist between on and off-prem that exist between off-prem and the edge. You got to manage, you got to be able to update firmware, so there's a management kind of path. There's a data path. You got to be able to pass data back and forth, not necessarily all the data. Some will be filtered by a gateway or whatever. But you got to be able to pass data back and forth securely. And you have to be able to secure that whole, that channel. So we definitely have some vision toward managing edge devices like yet another type of cloud, if you will. Some people in the industry call that fog. I don't, whatever we ultimately end up calling it. But we're headed in that direction, but it's a ways out, right? Right now, we're trying to make sure that hybrid IT is super simple. We're working on edge to cloud architecture that Antonio talked about, big investment for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, but we're way early in that part of the journey of merging these things together.
What should I read into dropping core out of last year's slogan of edge to core to cloud?
You shouldn't read a whole lot into that. I was in the discussion and I was one of the advocates to drop it. I think it's confusing because we don't believe cloud is a place. We actually believe cloud is an experience, and we believe that your core should look like a cloud, and your on-prem, off-prem, whatever. The world is moving to cloud. What I mean by that is not a destination-specific place of a cloud, but a cloud experience where resources are effectively utilized and shared between applications. You can instantly deploy applications. You're not waiting around for infrastructure to show up. It just, like in a Synergy, customers aren't waiting for anything. They just add more applications. If it's running short on storage, it tells you I'm running short on storage. You go jam more storage into a chassis, and it keeps going, right? You're just feeding it resources. You're not buying infrastructure stack to run your new application on. The infrastructure is sitting there. It basically has IaaS built into it. Just use it. So, I was one of the advocates to say we shouldn't be saying edge to core to cloud. It's all one big cloud, on and off-prem, traditional and new style. That's the vision of what we're trying to drive through, and calling something core kind of throws you in a different direction.
It's just another part of my hybrid cloud, or my multi-cloud.
That's right. That's right.
My
a hybrid cloud
on-prem.
is an on-off-prem. It's all of it. It's an experience. It's not a place.
Yeah, I'm going to keep going until somebody else raises that.
Good.
That's
all
just
you.
the way it is. So, a couple of people have beers in the room, so I'm going to make them drink. IoT.
Every time you say IoT, they have to drink.
They have,
Is that
to,
the
they
deal?
have to drink. So the conversation around edge, there's going to be a need to have cloud-like operations. Cloud is not a place. The edge is at some point, once we define it and we start to leverage it truly, we're going to want to consume that as we consume cloud. What is unique about the OneSphere? Chris hates this, and now I'm conscious about it. OneSphere architecture that enables flexibility, not just, I like Alistair's question about cross-compatibility, but abstracting across a completely different compute model in edge.
Yeah, let me take a shot at that. So I think that when you think about edge, I think OneSphere is a natural place to gravitate to, but don't discount the rest of the portfolio, because the enterprise edge is basically a micro data center, right? I mean, when we talk about edge, we're talking about things like cruise ships, or we're talking about oil rigs, or we're talking about autonomous driving test sites.
In this context, I mean, we do talk about IoT edge as well, kind of in the grander context. But yes, I mean, the first frontier of edge is exactly what you're talking about.
They're small data centers, right? They're maybe a single rack of computers. They're a few servers in a back office. But what are the characteristics of that part of the edge? Well, one is that you want to have low maintenance. You want to have unattended serviceability, right? You want to be able to, I don't have an IT staff there. So having kind of the simplicity of deployment, simplicity of maintenance, simplicity of management, that's one thing. The second characteristic of that is that there's data collected at the edge, and that data needs to be moved to the core or the cloud. It needs to be protected. Some of that data needs to land in a data lake somewhere. And typically the connections to where that data lake lives are thin. They might be sat links on a oil rig, right? So having storage technology that at its core is single instancing, is deduplicated, is compressed, so that they can efficiently move that data across distance is another characteristic that brings in other parts of our portfolio. And then finally, OneSphere being that SaaS service that runs in the cloud independent from the data center is the natural place to have your control, where you can manage many, many of those micro data centers. So I think when you talk about kind of that enterprise edge, there's a lot of characteristics of the whole software-defined portfolio that end up being parts of that solution.
Just a quick one. Do you consider something as simple as an ATM with its compute power and everything as an edge product? Or is it further out from the edge?
Oh, I definitely think it is an edge product. And I mean, all the way down to a little microprocessor in a fridge is an edge kind of product, but you kind of have to define what problem am I trying to solve in the current context. And I think you were talking about overloaded terms. I think edge is an overloaded term as well. When we speak about the HPE enterprise investing, $4 billion over 4 years in the edge, we're talking about the big edge, all of it, clear out to IoT devices and IoT networks, if you will, networks of devices of IoT. So that macro concept, that includes it all. I think what Wayland's kind of talking about is the next frontier. You can think there's two directions we're kind of attacking this whole edge, if you will. There's from the data center and branch office and that kind of out, meaning the most popular places for SimpliVity, for example, is small and medium business, mid-market, small data center. It's a mid-market product. It's a channel delivered product. You can kind of go that way, which is, well, you go smaller and smaller to like you said, you can get that way to ATM. The other way we're attacking it is with our kind of from the Aruba angle and our edge compute angle. We have specific products designed for IoT compute, OT compute. We have, and with our Aruba wireless, we have specific products around location-aware services, not just, hey, we'll provide wireless in this room, but we'll also tell you which conference rooms are empty and full, and we'll tell you, generally what the people traffic patterns are. Well, in stadiums, we have technology in Aruba. I'm sure you talked to the Aruba guys about it that say, here's how long the food line is in this part of the stadium, here's it is in the other part, or if you want to just order food at your chair, come and do that. I know we have that kind of technology in Levi Stadium, and we're doing many stadiums around. So, but that's more coming from that true people, places, things edge in. And that's why we're pretty confident about HPE IP is we kind of have a multi-angled approach here. It's not just data center and business out. It's also people, places, and things in because we have enormous technology with Aruba around that area, and we already have some experience in it. So in the macro sense, at HPE, we're talking about all of it, but I kind of gave you a little insight on how we view the problem. And those teams are collaborating and working together on the architecture to say, okay, what's the scoop? And frankly, it's less about defining some macro platform that's the be all end all. It's more about identifying the key use cases where you can go demonstrate value early on in this space and go nail those use cases. And location-based services is one of those that we're already doing in hospitals, in stadiums, and you know, so imagine then expanding on that to where you know the inventory in a stadium, you know, concession stand. You're not only tracking the people, you're tracking the things like, you know, are we out of Coke or popcorn in this one? We'll make sure, you know, so think of that as a smart edge that's not really a data center edge, but it's a whole lot of data, and it's aware because we have wireless in the stadium, and we kind of know what's going on depending on how many things are talking to that wireless. So there's a lot of power in the potential here.
Rick, can I ask you about one thing you guys were talking about in the OneSphere conversation? You mentioned sort of a predictive analytic around some sort of, and I envision it as some sort of AI wherein you can plug in the variables of your application, and OneSphere will then give you a generated report on where best to locate that app. Sounds a lot like a tool I've used before called Cloud Genera. Is that part of the equation, or is this a wholly homegrown component?
So we're a partner of Cloud Genera, and we've used them with various customers, and you know, they're one of our, I would call it ecosystem partner, but that might get you kind of in thinking of our synergy ecosystem. It's a different thing, but I would call that more of a static analysis kind of thing. What we're talking about is over time embedding technology to where that's a dynamic decision based on current situation inside your on-prem and off-prem assets. So more of a dynamic thing. You're right to start talking about it as AI. If you look at our AI offerings in HPE, already InfoSight is a powerful AI tool, not in this space, but I'm kind of building to where I get to this space, which is pretty much revolutionizing the predictive failure analysis for our platforms, and we're working aggressively to spread InfoSight across all platforms. You know, it started with Nimble, now it's on 3PAR. We're headed to SimpliVity almost immediately, and more and broad.
It's good that you said that because I believed that to be coming.
Yes.
And mentioned it in my tech talk.
Yeah, good. Well, then you weren't lying. So we're going as fast as we can. We're going to plug InfoSight into OneView. That way, the API in OneView, whatever's on OneView, you get it. So that's a big step that's kind of coming. So that's AI. We have other AI in Aruba where we've done some acquisitions that are around security. So predicting anomaly, or not predicting, detecting anomalies in your network to kind of go, hey, this is weird. Why are these two endpoints talking to each other? They never have before, and this one's not in the, you know, just kind of highlighting, you know, anomalies, weird stuff, and that's some of the Niara and core networks kind of capabilities. So AI there, but then also AI around management and workload placement is an area of investment for us. We're not there yet on OneSphere, but we definitely can see kind of the evolution of that, and customers who are buying in right now love that evolution. That's why they're POCing the current subscription model, because they know we're just going to continue to deliver features in this regard. So, yep, cool. So I think I hear bands rehearsing and really nearby, and we have a celebration thing, and it seems like we don't have a ton more questions. And I see everybody with a beer, and it looks really good. No, that's not the real issue. So maybe one more shot. Is anybody burning to ask a question, or one or two?
Just a suggestion. Talk a little bit about where would you go. All right.
Let's see. So talk about where we're going. I talked a little bit about where we're going on AI. Let's talk about each of the maybe platforms and talk about that. So OneView, continuing to invest, pull InfoSight in. It will be our crown jewel of on-prem simplification. SimpliVity, we just introduced Hyper-V, so multi-VM, add Plexxi to it. What else? We've got software-only version of SimpliVity coming out later this summer. So for customers who want kind of the dense value proposition without needing a compression card, we'll have that.
We didn't mention OneSphere as part of our Green Lake.
Oh, yes.
public
Recent announcement. I should have brought that up. Green Lake Hybrid Cloud is something we announced here at Discover. That's like pretty exciting. It's think of using our IP of OneSphere with OneView to do repeatable service delivery of customers who just say, I mean, we literally have customers who come to us and say, I just want to do cloud. Can I pay you by the month and you'll do it for me? And that is a really strong value proposition. We'll take our IP, we'll pick your mix of applications where they should live. We'll deploy them, we'll maintain the thing, we'll continue to enhance our IP and keep that up to date, and just deliver you a monthly bill for a certain number of users or a certain number of cores or a certain output or whatever. We already deliver Hadoop and HANA as a service today, an application with certain workloads. We're extending that model to say, hey, we'll just deliver cloud as a service for you. So that's pretty powerful. I already talked about all the stuff about where Plexxi's going, and so pretty happy about that as well. So yeah, so yesterday we did something unique in the spotlight session. We were taming the IT monster. So you guys will see more about that as it comes out on it's our latest campaign. I've already actually seen it. It'll be, it's on the various sporting events and things like that. But basically we're drawing the analogy that your IT in this new era of digital transformation can be like a big, clumsy, cumbersome monster that you kind of have to deal with. It's not it doesn't have ill intentions. It's not trying to get in your way, but it's just hard to coerce it to do what you want to do, like a big furry puppy dog. So now you get a Tame Your Monster sticker for your PC. Though I noticed not many of you are loaded up with stickers on your PC. I kind of expected the bloggers would be, but anyway, so now you've got that. And watch for the campaign. It's really resonating well with customers because kind of IT is lovable, but God, it can be difficult sometimes. And honestly, in my spotlight, it was really difficult to kind of tame the monster and try to talk about technical things at the same time. So anyway, thank you all for coming to Discover. Thank you all for these repeated sessions. And hopefully you can see when we talk about these things, we deliver. I mean, we've kind of got some pretty strong products in the software-defined and cloud space. So looking forward to keeping up the tradition here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick and Wayland. This has been the last of the Coffee Talks for Day 2 of HPE Discover. Join us again tomorrow morning. I believe we're starting at 7:30 with a refresh of the Refinery of the Future. That will be our first Coffee Talk tomorrow morning.